The big red brick house is where John Miller spent the first 77 years of his life.
I was born in Waupoos, or at the Rock, they call it Cressy, but we only lived there about 6 months, and they moved up to where my grandfather lived in Waupoos. That was the big house. And outside of that, it was there 77 years. The 100-acre farm there. And my father had stock, cows, horses, you know, everything goes to farm. And that big house of Miller's in Waupoos, you could cut wood 24 hours a day, and they had 5 stoves going in there once. So you never run out of, you had to cut a lot of wood. You get out there on a walking plow, or them other plows, sulkies, and sitting there, and it threw you off, you'd hit rocks. You know, you could go so deep, you'd bang, you'd go off and crack your shins and everything else. But it was a way of life, and that's what you had to do to live. It didn't seem to bother you any, but I mean, you started at a young age because that's the way you lived. Oh, we growed everything. Sugar cane, corn, peas, tomatoes, lima beans, even growed grapes. I remember my father one time put an acre of grapes in, right along the road there. And they wasn't the grapes for wine, they was the grapes that you buy in the store that like eat out of your house, the real blue ones. And that went for 3 or 4 years, and then getting into more cattle, and we needed the ground there for pasture, so the grapes went out. Well, it was a good life. I mean, things was tough for years, and it was in that time when things were tough going to school, and your mother and that buy a sewing machine, make your clothes, and you was happy to go. Things was tough. They was all good neighbors. They all went to different houses and played, like, not maybe back then for money, but they played euchre and all them other games, house-to-house parties, and had prizes. Where there was a lot of apples in Prince Edward County, everybody pretty well, 8 out of 10 houses had cider. And cider was an alcoholic drink. It got pretty strong, and everybody had it, so they treat back and forth. But there was a lot of people, like from Picton and different places, would come and get cider. I don't know, I guess it was still quite a lot of bootlegging going on out of your cellars, but that's the way it operated, even down through Waupoos. The neighbor up the road had a big cider mill. He ground cider, and then if they wanted extra good cider, they'd get their whiskey barrels from Corbyville, and perhaps he'd have a stack of them. I can remember when I was small, and the marks right in the stairs where you go down in the basement, in the cement, and I didn't notice that was only a few years before we moved out of there. It's the dates marked right in the graven in the stone, 1923 or something, and that's when they put a lot of cider down there. And there used to be 45 whiskey barrels go down there every fall. And I don't think it was all drank there. I think a lot of it was just sold, because my uncle had moved into town then, where the hospital is now. That big house in there belonged to my grandmother and grandfather, and he lived there with her after my grandfather died. And anyway, I think he got a lot of the cider and distributed it his way. Oh, I always got a kick out, but I mean, coming up as a kid, like my father would bring people in there all hours of the night, musical people. I remember a saxophone going about 3:30 in the morning down in the baseball, sitting there drinking cider and eating cheese. And lots of little kids up there. I mean, you kind of used to it, I guess.
Everybody had orchards back in those days. This was a 4-acre orchard here, right here. Everybody, You put the cider down for vinegar, make your own vinegar and so on, but somehow or other it got drank up. You can shake your head. Well, there's a lot of things, I'll tell you. No, there was all kinds of, lots of people made their own cider vinegar, wooden barrels of it. They couldn't have booze, so they'd have hard cider and you name it.
The late Everett Pringle of Waupoos recalls a cider-making tradition of his dad and neighbor.
I think Dad and Pat McCauley were the biggest suppliers of it on this side. Yeah. A lot of them used to call it Applejack. It used to be good, when the fresh came on there. Yeah. And maybe I should not say it, but I might as well tell the truth. Dad and a friend of his, a neighbor, and he had this old Model A flat bottom truck, and he took up a load of apples up to, I think it was only Brown, I'm pretty sure, and to make cider. And so he come back again. He said, "You ready to load yours up now, Bert? Do you want yours taken?" "Oh yeah." He said, "I'll take him a load in." So he took in enough for 8 45-gallon barrels. Between the two of them, they had 14 45-gallon barrels. But I'll tell you, when you had cider, you had callers every night. And when the cider was gone, nobody showed up. No.
The late Quentin Meinecker of Milford was 100 when he reminisced about county cider.
Cider, oh yeah. Mm-hmm. There was lots of apples, and they had a mill where they ground it. And if they wanted it old, they could just leave it, put it in barrels or something. And when it became old, they called it a drink,
Betty Cronk of Wellington.
Well, it was the way that they made money, I guess. Yeah. And I've also heard them, my dad tell that at one time they used to grow hops in Allisonville. And he used to go, my understanding was that they cut them. I've seen a picture of them, and they're very tall. And I guess they cut them, and then he'd carry them, and the women would pick the hops, which my impression is that they're like a bean. And he'd carry them to wherever the women picked them off. And the hops were sent to be used to make beer.
Albert Kopp remembers how cider was a staple for his dad.
That was a funny thing. As poor as we were at Point Peter, Dad always put 2 45-gallon barrels of cider down cellar. And the one he'd drink in the winter, along with the help of neighbors. And then in the summer, he would, haymaking time, he had to have his cider then. And then towards the end of the season, he'd, I don't know what they done to it. They turned the rest into vinegar for canning. Back in those days, everybody more or less made their own drink. You can make wine, out of anything but onions. Anything else, like red clover, potatoes, parsnips, wheat, you name it. And I know one time, Mother got the idea, she was making corn whiskey. And of course, there's quite a smell to it. And she had it behind the stove, heating up, and a neighbor come in. They said, "What are you making now, Grace?" "Oh," she said, "I thought I'd make a little whiskey." And they said, "Do you know that you're supposed to have a license? You can get fined if they find you making that." That night, the pigs had extra feed. All went out to the pig pen. She wasn't going to take any chances. So that ended that.
John's uncle tried farming for a few years and then decided it wasn't to his liking. He built his first boat in the barn behind the yellow house next to the big red brick house.
Well, it happened with the way they told me, I wasn't born right when it started. I was born in 1926, and that started around 1920 or maybe before, but my uncle would be George Miller, run the farm under his father was a boss, and he was getting up in years, but my father worked for his brother, George, and it run along for, I don't know, he might have worked it in maybe about 5 years, and then he decided when this rum running business started, where you could make quick money, and there was other ones involved in it too, that he might give it a try, and he was pretty well, I don't know, we just born him to be a good carpenter, you know, building boats. He could build anything, and that's where this rum runner started, when he built a boat up there, the first boat, and a neighbor up the road named Ross Wright, he helped him build it because he was a boat builder. He built boats, and anyway, it was quite interesting. But they had all them old wood tools they use, like stationary engines they run for, you know, to run this and that, and didn't have any much electrical. He gave up the farming and got into this boat, and the first one he built was a little smaller, because the building that we lived in years later, when I got older and got married, that's where he built the boat, and they had to tear the whole front end of it out to get the boat out. That's how big it was. See, main ducts, it would be false ducts. That was the closest point this side for them to unload. And they could go there because you're not in American waters. As soon as you got in American waters, you're in dangerous territory. And so Uncle, when he first started, he'd go there, and then there was other people delivered from there to the States, and he'd sell to them.
A lot of the rum running that we would know about here would be from the island of Main Ducks Island that does belong to this county, and it's right on the border of the international border, so they could watch what was going on and dash and get the booze across safely. I guess I didn't want to get shot at either.
There was people come in my father's place. Of course, he was tied up with his brother, and his brother was only 2 years older, but he kind of was a little boss over my father, you know. I mean, George kind of took his part and made Tony behave a little bit. But then they all gambled, too. I mean, gamblers went with the bootlegging and that. Pretty everybody bootleg gambled. Oh, pretty well. Yeah, he had some good trips across the water, but then he had some bad ones. And then he run aground and put a hole in his big boat, this big one he had built. And he didn't sink, but he got in and they got her plugged up. I got a picture of that shows that hole in the boat.